I know that most of us watching this video are in a safe place. But have you ever noticed that the space where we spend most of our lives is just a tiny, insignificant dot compared to the vastness of this world? This means that beyond the safety we're fortunate to enjoy, there are far harsher environments out there. In reality, humans have the remarkable ability to adapt and survive in diverse natural conditions, and that's absolutely true. However, when we step outside our comfort zones, just how far does that adaptability stretch? Have you ever imagined what the most terrifying and extreme places on Earth might look like? It could be a frigid wasteland, waiting to crush anyone daring to conquer it, a place dubbed the planet's largest open-air graveyard, or an island harboring deadly pathogens, ready to claim the life of anyone who ventures too close. I'm not sure what you'd call such places, but perhaps the most fitting terms are death zones or lands of the dead. For spots like these, it's best to steer clear entirely if you value your precious life. What are these places like? Why are they so fearsome? And with human capabilities, can we truly conquer these death zones? All your questions will be answered as we embark on a journey to explore the deadliest lands you should never set foot in. First, let me emphasize that the death zones we're exploring today are very real places on Earth. They're regions once inhabited by people or still sparsely populated even now. What makes these places dangerous and earns them the title, Lands of the Dead, can be split into two categories. One, the brutal, unforgiving forces of nature. And two, human errors that have rendered these lands incapable of sustaining life. I'm certain that after visiting these places, you'll realize just how extraordinarily safe your own surroundings are. To start, take a look at these images. Do they seem familiar? That's right, we're at Mount Everest, the roof of the world. At precisely 11:30 a.m. on May 29, 1953, two climbers, Edmund Hillary from New Zealand and Tenzing Norgay from Nepal, became the first to successfully summit the planet's highest peak. Together, they etched an unforgettable moment into world history, conquering Everest's 8-meter height after years of dreaming and determination. After 7 grueling weeks of survival in the freezing, exhausting Himalayan snowfields, these two humble figures triumphed. Carrying 30-kilogram backpacks, they endured air so thin and bone-chillingly cold it dropped to -19 degrees Celsius. Yet both Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay carved out moments to savor the glory of standing atop the world's highest point. They gazed out in all directions, basking in a success earned at the risk of their lives, sending a powerful message that no matter how harsh nature becomes, humanity's small stature can still prevail. As a tribute, they left behind a chocolate bar and a cross on Everest's summit, symbols of faith and life, hoping that other brave souls would follow in their footsteps on this perpetually snow-capped peak. Yet, behind that radiant glory, those two climbers could scarcely have foreseen that this breathtaking place they'd conquered would later become the largest burial ground for explorers. After that historic moment, people flocked to challenge the roof of the world, only to gradually uncover a chilling truth. Everest is truly terrifying. It's far more frightening than you could ever imagine. Everest has borne witness to countless generations of climbers and adventurers from around the globe, fueled by an unquenchable passion to push their limits and etch their names into history just once in their lifetime. Tragically, many of them never lived to see that dream fulfilled. As of 2016, out of the 4,000 climbers who attempted to conquer Everest, 280 have left their bodies forever entombed in the icy Himalayan snow. This grim toll has cemented Everest's status as the world's largest natural death zone. Can you picture what a person must endure to conquer the roof of the world? With its merciless natural conditions, an average person would struggle to acclimate to this climate, let alone conquer it. But if you're someone with exceptional physical conditioning and training, you might climb to about 2,500 meters without major issues. Beyond the 2,500-meter mark, symptoms begin to emerge as your body starts to buckle under the strain, most commonly nausea, headaches, dizziness, and exhaustion. It might not sound too alarming yet, and with a brief rest, the journey could likely continue. At 3,600 meters, your body signals distress again, this time with worse symptoms. Shortness of breath, coughing up blood, and even loss of consciousness may occur. At this altitude, some unlucky souls are forced out of the game. Those who press on to 5,400 meters face air so thin that oxygen levels drop to just 50% of what's available at sea level. And lingering here for over 30 minutes without an oxygen tank could prove fatal. Finally, at 8,000 meters, you enter what's known as the blood threshold, or the death zone where oxygen plummets to a mere 30% of sea level norms. Veteran American mountaineer David Breshears, who summited Everest multiple times, described the death zone like this. In the death zone, even with an oxygen tank, it feels like you're running on a treadmill while breathing through a straw. So, we can define the death zone as a term used by professional climbers worldwide to describe the region above 8,000 meters, where oxygen becomes a rare luxury for human lungs, leaving an amateur climber unconscious or dead within seconds without supplemental air. Even seasoned climbers quickly succumb to splitting headaches and fading consciousness. Oxygen deprivation, paired with sub-zero temperatures, triggers vomiting, disorientation, and hallucinations. Death is all but certain if oxygen and warmth aren't restored within minutes. Surely, you'd agree there's no debate. Everest deserves its title as the world's death zone. If you're an ordinary person, you absolutely shouldn't attempt to conquer it, because neither you nor I would stand the slightest chance of surviving a place like that. Yet, humanity always has its exceptions. Some people find ways to defy death and tame nature itself. The man we're looking at, Reinhold Messner, is a true legend among mountaineers. Few know that this climbing icon developed his passion for summits as a mere 5-year-old, at an age when his peers were preoccupied with eating and napping. Reinhold Messner embarked on his first expedition in Italy's Dolomites, a range of breathtaking landscapes unrivaled anywhere on Earth. By age 20, alongside his brother, Gunther Messner, he had established himself as one of Europe's most gifted climbers. For a man like him, genius is the only word that fits. The journey from genius to greatness is long, and to be deemed truly great, there was one place Reinhold Messner had to conquer. Without a doubt, the death zone of Everest. But with so many having already scaled Everest, how could he achieve a feat more dazzling than all who came before? The answer: conquer it without an oxygen tank. Reinhold Messner was the first to propose climbing Everest without supplemental oxygen. And given what we've discussed earlier, this was tantamount to suicide. Despite objections from fellow climbers and scientific skepticism. On May 8, 1978, a two-man team, Reinhold Messner and Austrian climber Peter Habeler, reached Everest's summit without oxygen tanks. Truly, I was no longer myself. Everything blurred before my eyes, my mind clouded over. Standing on the roof of the world, all I could hear were sharp, desperate breaths as we gasped for the scant oxygen in that razor-thin air. That's how Reinhold Messner recounted this miraculous journey. Yet, for him, that victory didn't feel absolute or fulfilling enough, since climbing Everest without oxygen was already an extraordinary feat in human history. Undoubtedly, that achievement secured his place in the annals of history. Still, it seems he didn't relish sharing that spotlight with anyone. Just 2 years later, on August 20th, 1980, Reinhold Messner set out to conquer Everest again. This time, entirely alone. The feeling of single-handedly conquering Everest was the toughest challenge of my life. I climbed that peak alone and returned safely alone. While ascending, I slipped and fell into a crevice at night, nearly giving up from hunger, cold, and fear. But my burning desire to conquer Everest solo pulled me back to my feet to keep fighting. Reaching the summit, that euphoria was akin to humanity's first steps on the moon. Everest is indeed a vast death zone. It has been, is, and will remain so forever. But as you can see, it's not the ultimate limit of human potential, because exceptional individuals have still managed to tame the roof of the world to vanquish the death zone of Everest. Truly, even the fiercest forces of nature can bow to human will. Yet, there are death zones humanity cannot subdue, ones born from our own hands. About 1 kilometer west off Scotland's coast lies the small island of Gruinard, its pristine beauty now a distant memory. For nearly 70 years ago, humans transformed it into one of the planet's most perilous zones, devoid of people or wildlife. Today, it resembles an abandoned wasteland straight out of a Hollywood post-apocalyptic film. And indeed, anyone bold enough to step foot here risks a gruesome death. For decades, people have wondered what turned this once lovely little island into a hellish death trap. To answer that, let's travel back to the early years of World War II, when the dark secrets of this so-called Death Island began to unravel. In 1940, as World War II reached its peak, especially after relentless German bombings ravaged England, the situation grew dire and chaotic, sparking fears within the British government of a potential biological attack from the Germans. In an era before the world knew of nuclear weapons, biological warfare was the ultimate monster. Facing this urgent threat, Britain's then Prime Minister Winston Churchill sought a weapon of equal measure, a necessity to retaliate and deter Nazi Germany should they unleash a devastating biological assault. The British swiftly launched research to assess the feasibility of a biological weapon code name, the anthrax bomb, where top military scientists at a clandestine bioweapons facility studied how anthrax bacteria could be weaponized against the enemy. The plan, devised by brilliant military minds, was to detonate bombs laced with anthrax spores, releasing this lethal bacteria into the air to carry out its mission of mass slaughter. Do you know just how terrifying anthrax is? Anthrax can produce a highly toxic protein that kills swiftly, and even a minuscule exposure to its spores can spell death for an adult. Not only does anthrax kill, but areas contaminated by it remain poisoned for an extraordinarily long time. It might still feel abstract to grasp this horror, but don't worry, I'll break it down further right now. Bacillus anthracis, or anthrax, is a rod-shaped anaerobic bacterium, so tiny it's almost invisible. Proven pathogenic in 1876 by Robert Koch, who extracted it from the blood of an infected cow, isolated it, and tested it on lab mice. In harsh environments, anthrax formed spores, oftentimes called endospores, depending on terminology. And these spores boast incredible resilience, surviving decades, even centuries, in unforgiving conditions. They've been documented on every continent, including the icy reaches of Antarctica. The spore's resistance to heat and disinfectants is nothing short of astonishing, enduring 5% phenol for up to 40 days without being eradicated. Boiled at 100 degrees Celsius, they persist for 10 to 15 minutes. Steamed at 121 degrees Celsius, they last 15 minutes. And dry heated at 150 degrees Celsius, they survive for an hour. Remarkably, these bacteria often linger as spores in soil, capable of thriving in that state for decades. Back to Britain's bioweapon tale. Once the anthrax bomb was developed, they needed a remote site to test its destructive power. And so, they chose Gruinard Island as the proving ground for the anthrax bomb's lethality. The first victims of this plague-ridden weapon were 80 sheep. They were secretly shipped to the island and quietly subjected to agonizing deaths as anthrax ravaged them. Days after the biobomb detonated, the sheep began dropping dead in droves, a process meticulously filmed by British military scientists, footage that remained hidden until 1997. But that's not the full story. The real terror lies in the contamination the anthrax bomb unleashed. The island was saturated with a deadly pathogen, with no one certain how long it would take to restore safety for humans or animals. It had been officially transformed by human hands into a desolate death zone. Beyond the long-term devastation inflicted on Gruinard, the aftermath of these bioweapon tests was catastrophic, with anthrax-riddled sheep carcasses buried haphazardly across the island, further fueling the spread of this horrific biological agent and silently killing the land. It wasn't until 1981, 39 years lost in shadow, that the public learned of the chilling truth Gruinard concealed. The secret surfaced when a group calling itself Dark Harvest sent anthrax-tainted soil samples to the press as proof, finally exposing the truth and branding Gruinard's experiments as the first instance of environmental terrorism. In 1986, under public pressure, the British government began decontaminating the island's soil, spraying 280 tons of diluted formalin mixed with seawater across its entirety. A year later, tests showed grim results. Only a small fraction of the soil was cleansed, while contamination lingered heavily in the rest. After the American ushered in the nuclear age in 1945 with the successful Trinity bomb test, biological weapons faded into obscurity, and Gruinard sank into oblivion alongside Britain's anthrax bomb project. More than 70 years have passed since those anthrax bomb experiments rocked Gruinard, and today it remains strictly quarantined, one of the planet's most dangerous zones, its soil still harboring resilient anthrax spores. Britain's attempts to rehabilitate Gruinard's land have all ended in failure, as anthrax spores prove nearly indestructible, much like the radioactivity of a nuclear bomb. To this day, though scientists claim no anthrax is detectable in sheep raised experimentally on the island, people still dare not set foot there to live or visit. Gruinard, a byproduct of war, stands as one of Earth's most hazardous abandoned zones, a death zone you must never approach. You might blame the British for their cruelty, and this lethal bioweapon could well be a lesson humanity never forgets. But you may not realize that the cruelty of the British was not unique, for to the Soviets, Britain's deadly Gruinard Island was perhaps nothing more than a mere experimental site. Indeed, during World War II, the Soviet Union was also a pioneer in developing mass-destructive biological weapons. Yet in scale and brutality, the Soviets' creations far surpassed those of the British. And in doing so, they too left behind a desolate, deadly wasteland when their projects ended. As early as the 1920s, the Soviet government began scouting a covert location for a scientific military complex dedicated to inventing, producing, and testing biological weapons. Initially, Lake Baikal topped the list of candidates due to its remote, rugged terrain, perfect for the secrecy the project demanded. But they soon realized how absurd that idea was. Baikal, the world's largest freshwater lake, would be an immense loss if contaminated by a failed experiment, an unthinkable waste of a vital resource. After much deliberation, the options narrowed to three: the Solovetsky Islands in the White Sea, Gruinard Island on Lake Seliger, and Vozrozhdeniya Island, with Vozrozhdeniya isolated in the Aral Sea, as we see now, ultimately chosen. Spanning 200 square kilometers, Vozrozhdeniya met every criterion Soviet leaders desired, chief among them, security from Western prying eyes. Once a paradise in Central Asia, surrounded by crystal-clear waters, it exuded the tranquil charm of a fishing village bustling with diligent locals. But all that beauty would soon fade into a distant memory. In 1948, as the Cold War between the USA and Union of Soviet Socialist Republics entered its third year, the Soviets dove headfirst into constructing a bioweapons testing site on Vozrozhdeniya, experimenting with nearly every human-threatening pathogen: anthrax, smallpox, plague, and Venezuelan equine encephalitis, to craft the ultimate weapon. Not stopping there, in 1954, they built a military base on the island named K7. And from this point on, the scientists secretly working at this base began conducting experiments on the effects of deadly infectious pathogens on animals. Can you guess which animals they used? Many might assume the Soviet scientists tested pathogens on rats, a common choice for lab experiments. But the reality was quite different. They targeted monkeys. Each year, roughly 200 to 300 monkeys were brought to the island, confined in large outdoor cages, forced to breathe bacteria-laden air for maximum exposure to disease. After a period, they'd be taken to labs where their blood was tested, and researchers tracked how the pathogens ravaged their bodies, typically resulting in the test monkeys dying in agony within weeks. Though isolated in the sea with most residents relocated elsewhere, Vozrozhdeniya remained bustling, home to 1,500 people, scientists, doctors, and military personnel, handpicked by the Soviet government to live and work in secrecy. Unnamed on maps and cloaked in absolute confidentiality, the Soviet felt confident in its deadly bioweapons ventures. Yet, 14 years after the first lab opened, the Cold War's dark underbelly, which the Soviets tried to conceal, came to light. In 1962, suspicious of odd activities in Central Asia's waters, the CIA deployed satellites, capturing images of Vozrozhdeniya. Beyond the fog of fishing villages lingered research buildings, an outdoor weapons test site, and a small animal compound. The CIA's sharp eyes missed nothing in those satellite photos. Amid the fierce arms race between these superpowers, any hint of the enemy's moves became a prime target for the other side. Naturally, the Americans suspected a secret Soviet weapons project, prompting immediate coordination between the U.S. Navy, Air Force, and CIA to investigate. The CIA compiled a detailed report brimming with data and images of Vozrozhdeniya, analyzing elements like soil, seawater, airspace above the fishing village, the weapon site, and the animal pens. They suspected the Soviets were covertly deploying chemical toxins or biological agents as war weapons. And they were right to suspect bioweapons testing on an isolated Central Asian island. But the Americans couldn't fathom that the Soviets' bioweapons involved pathogens so deadly and capable of mass human destruction. Nor could the Soviets have predicted that before perfecting their annihilating weapon, or using it against any foe, they'd become victims of their own creation. The shocking incident of this bioweapons project was later revealed through Professor Pyotr Burgasov's testimony, who recounted, on July 30th, 1971, reports reached him of unusual deaths at our Alz-K7, just as the base prepared to test its most potent smallpox strain in 23 years of operation. About 400 grams of smallpox pathogen were released into the environment by researchers. And soon after, a young scientist fell ill when her research vessel strayed too close to the lab, beyond the permitted distance. Her boat had ventured within 15 kilometers of the test zone, when the required buffer was 40 kilometers. Despite a swift vaccine dose, the strain's virulence overwhelmed her, leaving her exposed. Miraculously, death spared her, but she infected 9 others, including children, in the living quarters, resulting in 3 fatalities, a woman and 2 kids. Aware of the contagion's danger, the military promptly sealed off Vozrozhdeniya to halt a nationwide outbreak. Less than 2 weeks after the incident, island residents received immediate smallpox vaccinations. All roads were blocked, and transport from the island faced unprecedented scrutiny. All this was to shield Moscow from an unpredictable epidemic down the line. Ken Alibek, a former Soviet bioweapons official, later disclosed that the Soviet government deliberately selected an especially potent, highly transmissible smallpox strain for testing, aiming to weaponize it officially. The cost of their ambition, cheap yet devastatingly lethal, came swiftly, claiming lives in pursuit of this destructive power. The nightmare didn't end there. A year after the smallpox leak, the bodies of 2 fishermen previously reported missing from their boat were found, suspected to have been infected and untreated, followed by mass fish deaths in the surrounding waters with no clear cause. Roughly 17 years later, 50,000 antelopes reportedly dropped dead en masse within a single hour. Though I personally find this claim dubious, no known disease could kill on such a scale in just 1 hour. Moreover, 50,000 antelopes is a staggering number, and if they perished, other animals likely would have shared their fate, suggesting this might simply be an exaggeration of the Soviets' lethal weapon research. By the 1990s, defectors like Ken Alibek began leaking the island's deadly secrets and dangers. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the concept of this annihilating weapon lost the purpose it once held in the conflict. And with shifting realities plus fierce public backlash, the Soviet government officially shuttered our Alz-K7 in November 1991, evacuating all island inhabitants within 2 weeks. Civilian and military infrastructure was abandoned, turning Kantubek into a ghost town. Now, a bigger question looms. What happened to the containers of hazardous biological agents when our Alz-K7 closed? Sadly, these infectious canisters weren't properly stored or destroyed, leaking into the environment over decades. Take anthrax spores alone. About 200 tons of spore-laden mud were mixed with bleach and hastily buried in deep pits on Vozrozhdeniya. And you surely haven't forgotten how tenacious those spores are. After over 45 tests with deadly biological agents and sloppy cleanup, the entire island became contaminated, making it one of Earth's deadliest locals, a forsaken death zone you should never approach. Around the world, countless other perilous places remain unknown to us. On a planet like Earth, where we proudly proclaim life thrives, such death zones still lurk. Under humanity's reign, Could these death zones multiply, leaving us scrambling for rare sanctuaries to survive? Please share your thoughts in the comments below this video. For now, goodbye and see you in the next video. Wishing you all a wonderful day with your loved ones.